How do I stay focused on following God when I live in this really distracting world? That's the question we're talking about today on Theology Thursday. Let's dive in. So on Sunday, we are looking at a longer passage. We're looking at Luke chapter 12, verses 35 through 48. Today, though, we're looking at just verses 35 through verse 40. The passage begins with Jesus talking to his disciples and I guess the crowds around. And he says, "Stay dressed for action and keep your lamps burning." In Greek, it says,
"All right, everyone, gird your loins."
And I don't know if many of you have girded your loins as of late, but basically it's you tuck your dress up into your belt so that you can run real fast, right? If Jesus was talking today, he would probably say, be ready. Don't be wearing socks with flip-flops. You got to be ready to run. And then he goes on, he says, "And be like men who are waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes." It's kind of the imagery of this master who's gone off on this wedding feast, and the servants, they don't know how long he's going to be away, but they got to keep the property locked up so that no one steals anything. But they also got to stay awake so that when the master comes, that he isn't just waiting out in the cold and liable to get robbed. They have to be awake. That's kind of the idea going on here. And he says, if these servants are awake, even, to this late hour, truly I'll say to you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at the table, and he will come and serve them. The roles are reversed. And then Jesus tells this kind of second parable, and I kind of frustrated how a lot of our translations, they have this little but here, and it makes us think there's a kind of a contrasting sort of piece here, and it's not actually what's going on. It's just kind of a second parable that's essentially saying the same thing in a very different way. He says, "And know this, that if the master of the house," so totally different story here, "had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into." But the point being in both of these stories is the servants don't know when the master's coming back, and so they got to be awake so that they can let him in when he's there. And the master doesn't know when the thief is going to try to steal his stuff, and so he's got to be awake and aware so that he can't steal the stuff. The same point is just two different ways of saying it. And then Jesus says this, "You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Be ready." And the general point of this parable is just really simple, okay? This isn't complex stuff. Be ready. You don't know when your number is going to get called. If you're Zach Wilson this last week, you weren't expecting Aaron Rodgers' Achilles to act like a 39-year-old's Achilles. You weren't expecting that, but you had to be ready to go into the game and win the game. And he did. Like, you don't know when you're going to die and you're going to face Jesus. You don't know when Jesus is going to come back and you're going to be face to face with him. You don't know that day. You don't know that hour. Someone tells you you can know, they're lying. They have no clue. You have to be ready. That's the point here. You have to be prepared for that day. Don't think it's a long time off. Don't think that you have all this time to get right with God, because you just don't know when that day or that hour is going to come, when you're going to stand before God and answer for all these things that you've done. That's the message. Now, that's good and all. Makes sense. But this world is really distracting, and it's hard to stay vigilant. It's hard to stay focused on following God and being ready for him. So how can we? Now, that's one question. And actually, I think it's kind of a boring question. It's probably the one that's on our minds with this text, but maybe we can answer it by asking and answering two other more interesting questions. And the first question is, why are we so easily distracted from following God in the first place? Now, part of the problem is our sinful human nature is constantly seeking shortcuts and ways to optimize pleasure. And it's kind of it's rooted in a good thing in that we're seeking to progress and we're seeking to make advances and all these things. Like there's a good part of human nature here that's responsible for this, but it's been corrupted by sin. And now what's happened is this helpful thing is being used to destroy us. And you probably experienced this a lot, I know I did as a kid, where your parents told you to do something and they said, listen, you need to get this done before we get home. Okay, you need to wash the dishes before we get home. And we thought about it and we're like, okay, it's going to take 20 minutes to do that job. So I bet you if I start 10 minutes before they get home, I'll be able to finish it, right? Like we do that thing where we just kind of like put off our responsibilities as long as possible because we're trying to maximize the pleasure that we have, right? And that's kind of this normal thing that we do as humans. We have this tendency to forget that God is actually watching and that he cares about the things that we're doing. But we think, okay, well, if I can just get right at the end, it'll be okay. And what Jesus is saying is, you are not going to be able to know when the end is. So don't try to maximize your pleasure. You might think your end's coming 20 years from now. It might be 20 seconds from now. So be ready for that. But our sinful nature is constantly kind of doing this thing to say, oh, no, you got plenty of time later. Parents aren't getting home for another hour. You have plenty of time to do the dishes. And meanwhile, they're at the door. Not that that ever happened to me. Like ever, but be vigilant against it because it's trying to betray you, okay? Like expect that to arise in your heart because it happens in all of us. So first, stay vigilant against this thing that is distracting you, okay? So that's the answer to the first more interesting question. Consider the second more interesting question though, and that is, what does it actually look like for you to follow Jesus? And I want to make sure you just don't miss out on the language of joy in this text. You know, fundamentally, this relationship that we share with God isn't that of us serving God, but rather of God serving us. Like that's how the relationship works. We open the door to him, if you will, like the parable says, but that's just so that he can come in and he then serves us. He prepares to serve us as honored guests. Now, that's not to say that we don't serve God, because we do, but it's like comparing what a 2-year-old does to maintain order in the house than what a parent does to maintain order. Like, yeah, he lets us have a part in it, and we are important to the life of the house, but he's the real servant here, okay? He's the one who makes this relationship work. Like, fundamentally, our relationship only works because of grace, because of what God has done for us. So the life of following Jesus is less about worrying about, like screwing up, and it's more about looking forward to how Jesus is going to show his mercy and grace to us. More about how Jesus is going to show his kindness to us and to the world around us. We're looking forward to Jesus showing up because he's got presence. And so this aspect of surprise in the text kind of works in two directions. A double-edged sword here. If you are working against God, when you see him, you're going to be surprised, and it's not good. You will rightly be terrified because judgment will come to you, even though you thought you could avoid it. And so the message is, you should really make sure that you aren't in that spot one day. Instead, you want the happy surprise when you meet God. Because if you are walking with him, if you are not working against him and his will, but you are receiving his grace and sharing that grace with others, when you see him, you will also be surprised. But this surprise is going to be a lot more like when little kids get surprised by a visit from their grandparents. They know that pure, unadulterated grace is going to be theirs when their grandparents come. By the way, if my children's grandparents on either side are listening to this, you should come. That's not a guilt trip or anything. But think about this. How sad would it be if the grandparents showed up on an unexpected visit to the grandkids, but the grandkids weren't there to open up the door? Maybe they'd gone on vacation or something. How sad would it be if they didn't get to experience the joy of unadulterated grace? That's really what it's like for the Christian. We look forward to Christ coming back at the end of the age, or us going to him at the end of our lives, because we know that when we are with him, he's going to be so good to us. And we don't want to miss out on that. That's ultimately the greatest thing that keeps us grounded and focused on following God. It's tasting and enjoying the goodness of following Jesus. It's getting to have a part in this grace relationship with him. It's being known by him and knowing him. It's being loved by him so then we love him. It's receiving all the gifts that he has to give us. That's the thing that helps us stay focused on him. And I hope that helps you this week as you do live in this distracting world. Next week for Theology Thursday, we're jumping ahead in the Gospel of Luke as we continue this series looking at the parables of Jesus. We're going to be in Luke chapter 15. We're taking the whole chapter. It's long, but we're going to consider the question, why does God love bad people so much? So look forward to that one next week. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.